Our speaker tonight, Don Gregory, is a professor of physics at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where he's graduated 18 PhDs and 20 master's students since joining the faculty in 1992. Before that, he was a material scientist for NASA, Marshall Space Flight Center, and supervisory research physicist for the U.S. Army Missile Command. And he's the author of more than 100 technical journal papers. So what's he doing here as our historian? Well, that's his hobby. His hobby has been to record history, and you saw the two books that he has already put together, Jungvolk and the Diaries of Two German Soldiers. So here, please welcome Don Gregory.
Recently, in doing research for a book on the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler, which many of you know about, I came across many references to Dr. Harold Deutsch. Beginning in the early 1940s, a number of the conspirators trying to get rid of Hitler wrote letters to U.S. government officials asking for their assistance, and they were mostly ignored. Most of these letters were ignored. One author quotes Deutsch as saying, "In what Washington bureaucrat's wastebasket did those documents meet their end?" And I had to stop reading at that point. It just cracked me up. And I never met the guy, but from that one quote, I guarantee you I would like him. Will and I would like to thank the Harold Deutsch Roundtable for inviting us, and especially acknowledge the hospitality of Colonel Patton and Axel Kornfuhrer during our visit. It's been an experience we will not forget. It's been great. I myself have no claims as a historian, but thanks to you guys, I have made a lot of historians at my university jealous for being invited to this roundtable. So it was all worthwhile. Now, imagine, it's 1942, and you're a scrawny 9-year-old German boy who was born the year Adolf Hitler became chancellor. He's the only German leader you have ever known. Germany has already been at war almost 3 years and is being invaded from both the east and the west. And with a group of other boys your age, you repeat the following: "In the presence of this blood banner flag, which represents our Führer, I swear to devote all my energies and all my strength to the savior of our country, Adolf Hitler. I am willing and ready to give up my life for him, so help me God." This was the Jungvolk oath administered to 10-year-olds in 1936. But by 1942, they didn't care if you were 10 years old or not. 9 was just fine, and if you were a good-sized 8-year-old, that was fine too. Hitler's prediction that when an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," I calmly say, "Your child belongs to us already," had come true. The end of the First World War had a devastating effect on the youth of Germany. German men and German boys were slaughtered by the millions in places like Verdun, Sedan, Galicia, the Ukraine, the Palestine, Windhoek, and Tsingtao. There were no jobs, and if you had a job, the money they paid you with wasn't worth anything. Although Hitler, as the leader of the new National Socialist Party, ordered the party to create a branch for the young people in 1920, the party did not create its true first movement until 1922, called the Jugendbund. One year after the founding of the Sturmabteilung, or the SA, as we would know them, or the brown shirts. Up until that time, any German youth who wanted to join the party had to do so by first joining the SA. And that's actually how the first organizer of the Jugendbund got his job. He tried to join the SA, and they wouldn't take him. So Hitler heard about that and drafted him essentially to begin this organization. Most historians accept March 8, 1922 as the Jugendbund's founding date. That's the date that Hitler published an article in the party newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, calling on all German youth to join the Nazi Party's youth organization. On March 13, 1922, Hitler reached an agreement with Gustav Link. He was the guy that wanted to join the SA, who had volunteered in 1920 to create such an organization, but really didn't get anything done. So Hitler put him in charge, but he also put him under the commander of the SA, and at the time that was Johann Klinch. On May 13, 1922, Hitler and his small group of followers officially announced the creation of the youth movement of the German National Socialist Party. At that gathering, the Munich Jugendbund elected to call itself the Jungsturm Adolf Hitler. And if you've read anything of Nazi Germany, you know they loved adding Sturm to any of their descriptions. So it's called the Jungsturm Adolf Hitler. The Jungsturm was now officially led by Gustav Link from his Munich office on Corneliusstrasse in Munich. This also happened to be the headquarters of the Nazi Party at the time. And within a short period of time, affiliate Jugendbund chapters were established throughout mostly southern Germany and even a few in Austria. The Jugendbund's earliest public appearance was on September 2nd, 1922, at the Sedan Remembrance Day in Nuremberg. It's estimated that about 900 Jugendbund members attended this event. On November 8, 1923, Hitler and his Nazi Party led a putsch in Munich in an attempt to take over the government. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch to us. Link and the Jugendbund were not directly involved, although he and many of his followers were there and acted as messengers. One Jugendbund member, Kurt Neubauer, was killed by the Bavarian police during that time. Gerhard Rosbach, Hermann Goering, and Rudolf Hess fled the country. They went to Austria. So the Nazi Party seemed to be out of business for a while. Government retribution came quickly. The state of Bavaria essentially banned the National Socialist Party and the Jugendbund on November 9th, just the next day. Other German states quickly followed Bavaria's lead, and Link himself was arrested in a couple of weeks. Link was released from Landsberg prison on December 20, 1924, the same day that Adolf Hitler was released from the same prison after serving only 9 months of his 5-year sentence. While in prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. Many passages of his book were devoted to the youth of Germany and their role in a future National Socialist Party. In Austria, in the meantime, Rosbach quickly proceeded to establish his own new National Socialist youth organization, the Schill-Jungen, named for Prussian General Ferdinand von Schill, who led an unsuccessful attempt in 1809 in kicking the French out. While incarcerated at Landsberg prison, Hitler came to realize that the path to control and power in Germany was not through an armed revolution. He would work more with the system next time. As Hitler revamped and resurrected the Nazi Party in 1925, he also cleaned house in the leadership of the youth movement. Hitler dismissed Gustav Link as the head of the Jugendbund and replaced him with Edmund Heines, who had worked with Gerhard Rosbach and his Schill-Jungen in Austria. Efforts were quickly undertaken to bring together the many splinter groups of the youth. A competitor for the youth leadership position was Kurt Gruber. It did not take long for both these competing youth groups, the Jugendbund and the Schill-Jungen, and Hitler as well, to realize that only one youth group could exist in the party. Quickly, the party's youth groups were united with new uniforms and a new recognition symbol. To acknowledge the early ties to the SA, Gruber retained the familiar brown shirts of that group, but he added black shorts to the now familiar uniform. And he completed the ensemble with a new recognition pattern, the diamond pattern commonly seen in Hitler Youth insignia, replaced the standard swastika armband. A short while later, and at the recommendation of Dr. Hans Ziegler, the deputy Gauleiter of Thuringia, and Julius Streicher, the Gauleiter of Franconia, a new name was coined for the organization, the Hitler Jungen. On July 4, 1926, at the Nazi Party in Weimar, the Jugendbund organization was officially reborn as the Hitlerjugend. In 1928, a new department was added to the Hitlerjugend, the Jungvolk, for boys aged 10 to 14. And within a short period of time, the Bund Deutscher Mädel was also created for girls. An excellent example of these two, of the BDM, is in the book that was just introduced to you guys by Annalisa Woodstrom. And I've read both her books. They're great. Despite his successes, Gruber ran into a number of major political obstacles. His biggest one was from a young aristocrat named Baldur von Schirach. Von Schirach came from a very prestigious Prussian family. His mother was of American heritage, and two of her ancestors were signers of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And some of his relatives fought on the Union side during the War of Northern Aggression, also known as the American Civil War. I forget I'm north of the Mason-Dixon, aren't I? It did not take long for Hitler to make friends with the Schirach family because he knew that the nobles had connections to money and political influence, which he needed desperately at the time. In July 1928, von Schirach was given the position of leader of the National Socialist Student Organization in Munich, and soon set his sights on the next goal, to become leader of the Hitler Youth. In 1928, another young organizer named Arthur Oxman joined the Hitler Youth in Berlin. You'll hear more about him later. The year 1929 was an important year for the Hitler Youth. From this point forward, no child of a card-carrying member of the National Socialist Party could belong to any other youth group other than the Hitlerjugend. This is 1929. But membership was still pretty low. The Nazi Party wasn't very large itself at that time. There were about 20,000 boys and girls throughout Germany and Austria. On April 27, 1931, the Hitler Youth was officially required to attend political demonstrations and participate in parades alongside the SA. Kurt Gruber resigned his position as Reichsführer of the Hitler Youth in October of 1931. In Gruber's place, Adrian Theodor von Renteln was elevated to the position of Reichsführer of the Hitler Youth. Von Renteln held this position until he departed on June 16, 1932. On that day, von Schirach was named the new Reichsführer der Jugend, or leader of the Hitler Youth. The German government at the time, led by Chancellor Brüning, recognized what was going on with the Nazis and recognized the danger presented by this militant National Socialist organization and moved quickly. He ordered the dissolution of the SS and the SA, which meant the Hitlerjugend as well. So they had to officially cease and desist their operations at that time. It didn't last long, though, because on June 17, 1932, the new Chancellor, von Papen, lifted the ban on the SA and the SS. That meant they could again legally take up their former activities, and this also meant that the Hitler Youth was back in business. One of the largest Hitler Youth events of 1932 was the Reichsjugendtag, the Reichsyouth Day, held in Potsdam on October 1st and 2nd. Over 70,000 boys and girls attended these events. Hitler gave a speech for this massive group, and for the next 7 hours, he and his entourage watched them march past. At first, the BDM, as I mentioned earlier, the group for girls, consisted of two sections: the Jungmädel, or Young Girls League, for girls 10 to 14, and the BDM for girls ages 14 to 18. In 1938, a third section was introduced, the Belief and Beauty Society, Glaube und Schönheit, which was voluntary and open to unmarried girls between the ages of 17 and 21. The BDM did not attract a mass following until the Nazis came to power in 1933, but grew rapidly thereafter until membership was finally made compulsory for eligible girls between 10 and 18 in 1939, required to be a member. Members had to be ethnic Germans, German citizens, and free of hereditary diseases. The aim of the BDM movement was to organize Germany's young females to take care of house and home. Before the outbreak of war, the BDM was very popular with German girls, more popular than the Hitler Youth, as a matter of fact. The program offered a lot to girls of the time that they could not get otherwise, a life outside of school and their parents' homes. There was a catch, though. There was also a one-year service to the government requirement, which most of the girls dreaded. The BDM was run directly by von Schirach until 1934, when Trude Moore, a former postal worker, was appointed to the position of BDM Reichsreferentin, or National Speaker of the BDM. After Moore got married in 1937, she was required to resign her position, had to be unmarried. She was replaced by Dr. Jutta Rüdiger, who was a doctor of psychology from Dusseldorf, who was a close ally of Schirach. She joined Schirach in resisting efforts by the head of a competing organization, the Nazi Women's League, or the Frauenschaft, which was run by Gertrude Schultz-Klink, who was trying to get control of the BDM. After all the ballots were counted on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was declared the winner. He got 56% of the vote and proclaimed as the new Chancellor of Germany. With Hitler and the party firmly in control now, state funds could be used to fund the youth programs. Starting with 1933, every year was given a special designation. From 33 for the next 10 years, every year was given a special designation. Since the National Socialists came to power in January 33, that year was called Jahr der Organisation, the year of organization. As a reward for his previous years of service, Hitler elevated von Schirach to the new position of Jugendführer des Deutschen Reiches. On June 17, 1933, von Schirach, in his new capacity as youth leader of Germany, answered only to Hitler, and the new position was equivalent to a Reichsminister. During the September 1934 rally in Nuremberg, Leni Riefenstahl made one of the most effective propaganda and documentary films in history, The Triumph of the Will. Hitler Youth honor guards and Hitler Youth groups from around Germany played prominent roles in the film. 1934 was also the year of the Röhm Putsch. During this round of purges and executions, old political scores were settled and opposition members within the Nazi leadership were eliminated. This also had a trickle-down effect on the Hitler Youth, as they too settled some scores and eliminated a number of opposition youth leaders, although they didn't eliminate them the same way that the others got eliminated. In 1935, the German Hitler Youth movement could count on approximately 60% of all eligible, the key word is eligible, German youths in its ranks. At the September 1935 Nuremberg Party rally, Hitler proclaimed to the 54,000 attending Hitler Youth that gone were the days of a weak German youth. A new Germany had arrived. Hitler and Germany expected the youth to be swift as a greyhound, as tough as leather, and as hard as Krupp steel. The new German youth would be physically fit, reared in strict discipline, and they would be obedient to the needs of Germany and the party. The reason 1936 was called the year of the Jungvolk was because it was von Schirach's goal to enroll every German 10 to 14-year-old boy in the Jungvolk. On April 20, 1936, the Fuhrer's 47th birthday, von Schirach held a massive function at the Marienburg Castle in East Prussia, where all of Germany's Jungvolk swore an oath of allegiance to Adolf Hitler. At the end of 1936, there were 5 million members of the Hitler Youth. On December 1st, 1936, a law was enacted which made it mandatory for all German youths to be educated according to the philosophies of National Socialism from the age 10 and up. Every German youth was now obligated to join the Hitler Youth. Every January, each 10-year-old German boy was required to register himself with the Hitler Youth authorities. After registration, the individual would receive his official registration card. In March of that same year, the 10-year-old was ordered to appear at his local Standort for an induction hearing. Barring any official reason for exclusion, such as political unreliability, I don't know how unreliable a 10-year-old could be, or racial or religious disqualification, the new candidate was approved for membership as a Pimp of the Jungvolk. The official acceptance ceremony was held every April 20th, Hitler's birthday. Hitler and the Hitler Youth leadership were well aware of the fact that up until now, there were few specialized activities for the youth outside the general Hitler Youth. To alleviate this problem, specialized groups were established, like the Hitler Youth Flieger, which was for children interested in aviation, Hitler Youth Marine for 10-year-olds and up interested in marine, watercraft, boats, Navy, yes. Hitler Youth Motors for children interested in cars, motorcycles, and engines. And the Hitler Youth Streifendienst, which was the Hitler Youth Police. Yes, they had their own police. And of primary importance, the Hitler Youth Flak for anti-aircraft defense. There were several other groups as well. 1938 also had a profound effect on the membership of the Hitler Youth. Both the Austrian and Sudeten regions Hitler Youth groups were now officially added to the German Hitler Youth organization. Officially, the leadership claimed to have close to 9 million members, or nearly 90% of all German youth. In December 1939, von Schirach obtained Hitler's permission to join the Wehrmacht in combat. So he vacated his post of Reichsjugendführer, which was then given temporarily at the time to Arthur Axmann. Since the late 1930s, Hitler Youth members actively participated in local air raid drills, evacuating buildings and providing first aid treatment to the wounded, fighting fires as auxiliaries to the fire departments, and supporting local flak units. When war broke out in September 1939, the Hitler Youth was quickly mobilized to provide support in local neighborhoods. After August of 1940, the first RAF bombers appeared over Berlin and other German cities. The air war had now officially begun in earnest. But in nearly every German city, the Hitler Youth was already actively participating in the defense of the Reich, particularly as unofficial flak helpers. In September of 1942, Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering officially requested that Hitler issue a special order allowing Hitler Youth members to help in the aerial defense of the Reich. The idea was to allow the Luftwaffe to release flak men, which the Germans desperately needed by this time for frontline combat duty, and replace them with the Hitler Youth recruits. Shortly thereafter, the first group of 11,500 flak helpers was mobilized. By 1943, nearly every flak unit in Germany was manned partially by Hitler Youth flak helpers. Over 56,000 of them were on duty, earning 50 Reichspfennig a day by the middle of 1944. I think that's about $4. Flakhelfers were also active on all fronts. Toward 1944 and into 1945, many of them and their guns were directed to fight against ground targets as well. By May of 1945, there were 200,000 Hitler Youth Flakhelfers on duty. The BDM assisted the war effort in many ways. Younger girls collected donations of money as well as goods such as clothing or old newspapers for the Winter Relief Program and other Nazi charitable organizations. Many groups, particularly the BDM, had choirs and musical groups who visited wounded soldiers at hospitals or sent care packages to the front. In 1943, BDM girls were also directed to serve as Flakhelfers. They were primarily assigned to operate electronic plotting, radar tracking, and targeting equipment, as well as to act as communicators with Luftwaffe pilots in the air. The older girls volunteered as nurses' aides in hospitals or to help at train stations where wounded soldiers or refugees needed a hand. After 1943, as Allied air attacks on German cities increased, many BDM girls went into paramilitary and military services as well. On August 7, 1940, Arthur Axmann officially replaced von Schirach as the new Reichsjugendführer. From April 1942 to early 1943, the number of killed Hitler Youth leaders rose from 8,000 to 15,000, mostly due to the Allied aerial bombing. 600,000 Hitler Youth boys and 1.4 million BDM girls assisted German farmers bringing in the summer and fall harvests in 1942. As much as possible, routine Hitler Youth and BDM activities such as hiking, camping, sports competition, and other things continued. But increasingly, paramilitary training was emphasized to prepare them for military service. Toward the fall of 1944, as many Hitler Youth boys as possible were rounded up and drafted into digging anti-tank ditches and defensive trenches in front of German towns to slow down the advancing Soviets and to stem the advance of the Allied forces in the West. Hundreds of miles of ditches were dug by Hitler Youth members all over the eastern and western fronts. A good description of this is given in a couple of books written by Alphonse Heck. If you've had a chance, he's written a couple of books on the Hitler Youth, and one of them he talks a great deal about spending months digging ditches. The years of war were beginning to take a serious toll on the German nation. Each year, more and more youths were drafted to serve on one front or another. In February of 1945, German political leaders believed that there was a need to create a rear area guerrilla force, especially between Berlin and the Oder-Neisse River. Werewolves, who came from about the only remaining pool of bodies available, that is the Hitler Youth and the BDM, were told that they were now going to transform themselves into National Socialist partisans who would attack Allied and Soviet rear positions as they saw fit. Major General Reinhard Gehlen was a lead officer of this undertaking. In fact, it was his idea to incorporate Hitler Youth and BDM youths into spying operations. In the short time available, Hitler Youth members were provided with all the basic training they could possibly absorb in sabotage and clandestine communications. A number of these cells actually caused the Soviets a great deal of problems in the rear areas as they advanced toward Berlin. Many individual werewolf groups continued to operate in both the Allied sectors and the Soviet sector well after the surrender. The end of 1944, the year of 1944 saw the final call-up of Hitler Youth members to serve the nation in a military capacity. The boys, often no older than 11, were quickly trained to use the latest anti-tank Panzerfaust, their version of our bazooka, a lot more user-friendly, and sent to the front lines. In March 1945, Reichsleiter Martin Bormann recommended that BDM girls and ladies be given guns and sent to the front lines to help defend Germany. His goal was to create as many Frauenbataillonen as he could. Axmann was opposed to this idea, and it really didn't go anywhere. As German casualties escalated with a combination of Operation Bagration in the east and Operation Cobra in the west, members of the Hitlerjugend were recruited at ever younger ages. By 1945, the Volkssturm was commonly drafting 12-year-old Hitler Youth members into its ranks. During the Battle of Berlin, Axmann's Hitler Youth formed a major part of the last line of German defense. Many Hitler Youth members fought as active combatants in places such as Berlin, Breslau, Danzig, and Königsberg, fighting the advancing Soviet forces with no more than a few Panzerfausts in their hands. One of the last films taken of Adolf Hitler shows him awarding medals to members of the Hitler Youth defending Berlin outside his bunker. In the last days of the war, some BDM girls also joined the Volkssturm in Berlin and other cities in fighting the invading Allied armies. And some of the girls were recruited into werewolf groups. A former BDM leader, Ilse Hirsch, was part of the team that assassinated Franz Oppenhoff, the Allied-appointed mayor of Aachen, in March 1945. After the war, and after the Allied authorities had a chance to sort out the various German adult and youth organizations, civilian and military, they were able to render a decision regarding the Hitler Youth. In the Western Allied sectors of Germany, although the Hitler Youth was not declared to be a criminal organization, it was officially dissolved. Baldur von Schirach received a 20-year sentence in Nuremberg. He was released on September 30th, 1966. He served the entire 20 years and retired quietly to southern Germany. He died August 8, 1974. Arthur Axmann was sentenced in a later Nuremberg trial in 1949 to 3 years and 3 months imprisonment. And when he was released, he was retried and fined approximately half his net worth. He died October 24, 1996. Jutta Rüdiger, the BDM leader, was arrested directly after the end of the war and imprisoned for 2.5 years without a trial. After her release, she went back to her psychology practice and never regretted her service to the Reich. Now, the best-known fighting force of the Hitler Youth was the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, whose origins can be traced back to 1942, late 1942, early 1943. The idea to create a Hitlerjugend division was first proposed by SS Gruppenführer Gottlob Berger for Hitler's consideration sometime in January of 1943. His vision called for the drafting of all Hitler Youth members who were born in 1926 and assign them to a Hitlerjugend combat formation. Hitler liked the idea and ordered Berger to commence organizing the division. The official order was issued on the 10th of February, 1943. On May the 1st, 1943, the first group of 8,000 Hitler Youth volunteers reported to the training camps. On July 1st, 1943, 2 months, the graduating class was released for service in the new division. The same day, a second group of 8,000 boys was ready to enter training. By the 1st of September, 1943, 16,000 trained Hitler Youth recruits were listed on the rosters of the newly formed Hitlerjugend division. As per an order dated June 24, 1943, it was decided that the SS Hitlerjugend Division would be formed as the 12th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Hitlerjugend. However, an order dated 5 months later amended that order by calling for the Hitler Youth Panzer Grenadier Division to be reorganized into a full-up SS Panzer Division. A number of SS veterans, mostly from the Eastern Front, were attached to the new division. A large percentage of these experienced individuals came from the famous 1st SS Panzer Division, the Leibstarte Adolf Hitler. Among them were Max Wünsche, Kurt Meyer, Gerd Bremer, Wilhelm Munke, Hugo Kraus, and Rudolf von Ribbentrop, who was the son of the Nazi foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. The 1st Divisional commander was SS Oberfuhrer Fritz Witt, who, when he received the command, was quite young to command a division, only 34 years old. The battle-hardened Eastern Front SS and Wehrmacht veterans taught the new Hitler Youth Panzer Grenadiers all they could with the allotted time, 2 months. As a result, morale was very high in the entire division. After their training had been completed during the spring of 1943, they were ready for release to the Western Front. Shortly before June 6, 1944, the Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division was moved from its training camp in Beverloo to the town of Hasselt in Belgium. This is where they were held as a reserve unit to help check the anticipated Allied advance. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the Allied powers landed on the coast of Normandy. The Western Front now officially existed. At 14:30 hours, June 6, 1944, the Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division was ordered to protect Gehlen. This was in close proximity to the British and Canadian landing sites of Juno and Sword. But as soon as the division arrived in the area, they came under heavy Allied air attacks. The Allies controlled the air. As a result, the division did not make it to its assigned attack position until 10 o'clock that night. In their first engagement with the Canadians, the Hitler Youth Division destroyed 28 Canadian tanks while losing only 6 soldiers. They fought with a very high degree of determination. However, the odds were against them in the long run. In slightly over 1 month of combat, the Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division lost over 60% of its forces in combat. The division commander, Fritz Witt, was killed when British naval fire hit his command center dead on. The new division commander became Kurt Panzer Meyer. At that time, he became the youngest division commander in the entire German army. He was 33 years old. After the British and Canadian forces liberated Gehlen, the Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division was one of the 24 German combat divisions that became encircled in the Falaise pocket. At this time, the division was ordered to hold the German lines on the northern edge of the pocket so that the other trap divisions could escape as best they could. The Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division escaped being encircled, as did about 20,000 other Germans, but over 50,000 were trapped in the pocket and surrendered to the Allies. After the Falaise pocket campaign, the Hitler Youth SS Panzer Division had lost nearly all its armor, much of their equipment, and most of their heavy weapons. In December 1944, the division participated in the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. After that, the division was sent to Hungary, where it was supposed to assist in recapturing Budapest. On March 8th, approximately 10,000 survivors of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend surrendered to the American 65th Infantry Division, 7th Army, near Enns in Austria. Other notable members of the 12th SS Panzer Division were Hans Hermann Junge, who was valet to Adolf Hitler and the husband of Traudl Junge, his secretary. Karl Kraus, who was also a valet to Hitler from 1934 to 1939. And Herbert Walther, you can find his books. He's author of several books on the Waffen-SS. Now, as a good professor, I also have to quote my sources where I got this information, a great deal of it. So I want to acknowledge a series of short articles written for Axis History Forum. Some of you may know that. It's a good website. It's not crazy Nazis. It's a good historical representation. And the article is written by Avro L. Verkamer. And one of those flak helpers I was talking about earlier, and my co-author on 2 books, Wilhelm Gehlen, the nephew of Major General Reinhard Gehlen, is with us here today. And if you think none of this could ever happen again, just look at the youth of North Korea. In my freshman Western Civ class, a student brought up the saying that history repeats itself. My professor quickly added, and it's a damn good thing it does because we don't always get it the first time around. Thank you very much.
One of the gentlemen is born in 1923, and the youngest of our gentlemen here is born in 1934. So they will have somewhat different views. Some of them still were part of the Jungvolk and the Hitler Youth during peacetime, but generally all of them basically have just the wartime experience. So I'd like to introduce them. First of all, starting over here from your perspective, on your left, Wilhelm Gehlen, whose story, for those of you that bought the book Jungvolk, that is his story. Next we have, thank you, Yogi. Next we have Hans-Peter Borgward, Fred Aderholt, Eberhard Buelach, Paul Wittig, and Yogi Push. Is the mic?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a very great talker, you know. I never did that before, you know, in front of an audience like that. But I try to do my best. I'm German and I live in Tennessee now, you know, in the hillbilly country. So you can imagine what I feel like. Anyway, when we were talking about Hitler Youth earlier on. Now, there also was a Hitler Youth police. And you could join in the Hitler Youth Police when you were 15 years old. And I've got an original application form here for Hitler Youth Polizei, Streifendienst. And they had the authority to arrest any other Hitler Youth who did something wrong. I wish we had that nowadays, you know. Now I come to myself. Now I joined in what they call the Jungvolk. That was in the mid-1940s. Our family, we came from the countryside, you know, and we were not rich people. We were just farmers and gardeners. And Granddad was a royalist, you know. He liked Kaiser Wilhelm and all that. He fought in World War I. The rest of the family, like my father, went to Schneidermühl in 1938 to do his worker service, but by trade he was a tram driver, electric streetcar driver. And the Wehrmacht thought, well, a streetcar driver can drive a tank, so we get him on a tank, he can drive a tank in the next war, which he did actually, well, an assault gun. When I joined in the Jungvolk, I didn't want to go first because, you know, school, we didn't know much about what was going on, except there was a war on, and we want to shoot. Every boy wants to shoot, even nowadays, you know, give him a gun, and he runs around in the garden, bang, bang, you know. But at the time then, the Allied bombing started in Germany, and when the first bombs fell on our town, you know, we were eager to join in the fray, to do something about it, but as children. So I joined in the Jungvolk. First, Mum said, no, you're not going. I said, well, if you say no, You wait until Mr. Funk comes. He was the Bandführer. He tells you different, and he did, so I had to go. But we were poor, and I couldn't afford to buy a uniform. Besides, my father was not at home, so I got the uniform for nothing. I was lucky. It was not my uniform, it belonged to the Hitler Youth. I had to give it back in case we won the war and I joined in the Wehrmacht. I had to give the Hitler Youth, which it never came to that anyway. But once you're in the PIMF or the Hitler Youth, you don't have much choice. You either go, you can go to parades and you can go, drumming and marching through the town and listening to speeches. But in school, we also had aircraft identification lessons. And we had to know what aircraft looks like in case we had an attack so we could jump into the next trench. And I like that. I like the idea. Then one day, Quad 4, which is a 20mm 4-barreled gun battery, was installed just about a mile from our house on top of a hill to protect 88mm anti-aircraft gun. Now I got friendly with the soldiers, and eventually they said, yes, we can do with you. You can run like a rabbit. We need a melder, a messenger. Half the time the telephone didn't work between the 88mm and the 20mm, so I had to dash backwards and forward. And I liked the idea, it was good. Because in the beginning, in 1943 or 42, when the Americans started bombing Germany, the planes were 22,000 feet high, and that was far out of our reach. But by the time the invasion started in 1944, they came a bit lower, and eventually they came as high as the houses. And sometimes they knocked even the chimneys down. Now that was getting a bit dangerous, you see. But I had no choice, because it was either for me going and digging anti-tank ditches, which I didn't like. I had enough to do digging the garden over, or stay with the flak. And I decided to stay with the flak because there was a 1-foot concrete roof over my head. And in an anti-tank ditch, there was nothing.
Hans-Peter, please tell them when you were born, roughly where you're from in Germany, and then up to your getting into Jungvolk.
I thank you for attending the meeting here this evening, and it's a very difficult meeting. And it's a very difficult evening for me. I have my son here, to whom I never talked about what I say tonight in 51 years. I was born in Germany in 1932, and my first day in school was September 1st, 1939. Today, 5 weeks ago, when World War II started, with the mother of the German Navy, Air Force, the U-87, went into Poland. My family lived in our hometown for over 300 years. My grandfather was a federal veterinarian, but had his private practice too. But his name was Abraham. And I talked to you a little bit how difficult it was with the name Abraham. I had 3 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. My second brother will be buried tomorrow. He just passed away. And a week ago I still talked to him because having accepted on September 2nd to speak at this group, what his impressions were, because he was 2 years younger than I was. And we talked at length. We talked an hour and a half, and he lived in our hometown of Cuxhaven, Germany. Cuxhaven, Germany is at the confluence from the river Weser and Elbe into the North Sea. River Elbe with the town of Hamburg, and then the river Weser with Bremerhaven, what became later on, we were actually the British zone, what became later on an American enclave, because all the shipments went out of Bremerhaven for the American zone, that was farther south of us. And in looking at this meeting today, I actually lived in 6 generations. I knew my 2 grandmothers, not my 2 grandfathers, where one was a veterinarian and the other one was a school administrator. I knew my parents as number 2. Then my wife is with me here tonight, and we just celebrated last year our 50th wedding anniversary, and we came to this country in 1958 and came married in Germany and came over to the United States. I had a 5-year job assignments. My academic background is ag economy and ag engineering. So now I get, in having talked about this, I get about just a few things that in our town we had a big curtain over the River Elbe that was each evening lowered, because at the beginning of the war the battleship Bismarck still was in the docks in Hamburg, Germany. And you know what happened at Scapa Flow with Prien? So they were really afraid that that could happen in Hamburg too. We were already, when I listened to you, the first time British planes appeared because France and England declared, after the invasion by the Germans in Poland, declared war against Germany. And there came a Blenheim. We had studied the English Royal Air Force, and we had studied so that we could see what planes there were. And this was a Blenheim with a turret. And this was a Blenheim who had already a turret. And there was a flag at the German coast on our dike. We had an alarm, and this plane was sent to send material, metallic paper, drop it over the northern part of Germany. It really accelerated after that. And this metallic paper interfered with the radar that was newly installed. And we as young boys, I was not even organized at that time in the PIMP. I was 6 years old. We had to gather this metallic paper in pastures, in streets, but then also they dropped ration cards, because the ration started right away, and we had rations card for bread and for Brötchen. It was in German, but you know, the German Brötchen was spelled in OE. They couldn't print a umlaut, so it was all worthless. But we had to bring those papers in. Then I joined the PIMP in 1941. Up till 42. After 2 years then I went into the Jungvolk till 43, and then with 43 I was in the Hitler Youth for until the war's end.
I was born in 1923, and I grew up on a farm, and at age 10 my parents sent me to a private school, and this private school had a scout battalion that dated back to Frederick II. From that school, General Field Marshal Schlieffen graduated, and several others well-known generals in the German army. And in 1934, that's when I became involuntarily a member of the Hitler Youth. And how that got about was that one afternoon we were playing in the yard of the school, and a Volkswagen came onto the yard, and some Hayat Hitlerjugend bigwigs stepped out of that little car. And they went up to the administration of the school, and afterwards we found out that they had given them two conditions. Either you turn over the scout battalion to the Hitler Youth, or we close you up. Well, the school was smart enough to say, we'll turn them over to the Hitler Youth so we can continue our educational program. There was not much new for us as far as Hitler Youth is concerned, because we grew up at that school pretty tough. And I've told some of you who know me that, for instance, in the winter, we put on our shorts and our spikes and followed in the wind shadow of trucks through the city. So it was very rarely in the morning that one of our teachers said, you can wear a sweatshirt today or not. As far as the family conditions are concerned, are those my conditions or my father and mother?
How did your parents feel about you suddenly becoming Hitlerjugend?
No choice. There was no choice. And we didn't talk much about it. All I did is ask them to pay for my uniform, the Hayat uniform. So there were no tensions in the family. The only tensions that I remember was with the party, because my dad was a typical Prussian. And when there was Flag Day, there were 3 flags out of the windows on our farm. This was a house with 28 rooms, was built in 1811. And so we had enough windows to hang out flags. On one side was a Nazi flag, in the middle was a black, white, and red, and on the other side was a black and white Prussian colors. And my dad was asked several times to remove that flag, but it was never removed.
Yogi, if I may just add, when he says the black, white, red flag, that was the flag of both the Second Reich, the Kaiser Reich, and then also the German flag until
World War I.
1945.
Yeah. As far as enthusiasm is concerned, when you are forced into something like this, there's not much enthusiasm. There were some idiots that thought that was a pretty good movement, but it never took really foot in the school, because we followed our own system. We participated in the celebration of May 1st and some other Nazi field days or whatever you want to call it, celebrations. But it never took a real good hold in the school.
I was born in Hamburg, just a little ways up the river from Cuxhaven, the big seaport to the North Sea. In the year 1936, I completed elementary school. That was a time the initial cut is being made in the German school system of that time, where some went on to secondary school, some went to the gymnasium, which was a 12-year school, and some stayed in the elementary school till 8th grade. I went at that point in 1936 to elementary school, no, to secondary school, which was a 10-year program. And it was also the time when I voluntarily joined the Jungvolk. At that time, we used the term pimp interchangeably. I thought in the beginning of my Jungvolk period, which is basically covers a Cub Scout age. I was just joining a group that everybody else was joining, and I did not have any particular hang-ups about it, and I don't remember any real very unpleasant experiences.
Fred, tell them about the uniform.
Well, one episode that came a little later, well, it came all at the same time, really. When I came that day and informed my parents that I joined Jungvolk today, they acted very strange. They looked at each other, and they just didn't know what to make of it. But it was a time when parents couldn't tell their children everything, because children would talk to other children, and those other children will talk in their families. And if it was the wrong kind of information, next thing you would have the Gestapo in your house and looking at your father's bookcase and desk and so on. So my parents were silent. And it was at that time, early in my time in the Jungvolk, that I had a picture where our whole troop visited the local newspaper company, and that already was a party newspaper at that time. And I was the only kid there with no uniform. I was wearing a winter coat and a beret, and the other kids all had their black ski pants, and in the winter they also wore like a black sweater-like top.
And why did you not have a uniform? Tell them.
My parents just wouldn't buy it, and they never explained it to me, and that's what it was like being a kid in Germany. You didn't ask any questions.
Dankeschön. Before I tell you who I am, I'd like to express my appreciation, my gratitude for those of you here tonight in the audience who are World War II veterans who liberated me and most of us from the yoke of Hitler. If that would have happened, if you would not have been successful, we would not be sitting here. I'm Eberhard Bulak. I was born in 1934 in Echterdingen outside of Stuttgart, next to the Stuttgart airport. I became a member of the Hitler Youth in 1944. 1 month before that time, a house was bombed by the British at night, and it completely demolished, destroyed. The fortune was we were at the neighbor's house because they had a deeper cellar. So actually, the only clothes I had was what I wore on my body. 1 month later, in April, I became 10 years old. I was told to join Hitler Youth, and I was happy to do so because I got a new uniform. That was my second change of clothing. And in those days, we had the summer uniform was short pants, and with the shirt and knee highs and a shoulder strap. For the winter, we had winter long trousers that were tied by the ankle and a warm wool jacket. And I believe that we enjoyed the Hitler Youth because it gave us something to do. And in our age time, in this country, the boys played cowboy and Indian. We played soldier, beating the French, because we always lost. The Germans lost 3 wars against the French, or 2 in succession anyway. So we were always somehow trying to beat the French, and we played war games, and we learned how to march. Obviously, we learned how to fire a weapon. We learned marksmanship, gun safety. We learned how to build campfires. And we had sports, athletics, 100-meter dash, broad jump and long jump, and played soccer. And it was an exciting time. And also the good thing about it was that our parents knew where we were. We were not getting in trouble, and I don't think it was ever mentioned here. I think during Hitler's time there was no juvenile delinquency. Because I think in retrospect, looking back, we're taught to respect other people, other people's property. We had to salute every person in a uniform, be it a soldier, be it a streetcar conductor, the mailman, even the city worker who was sweeping the street. As long as he or she had a uniform, we had to salute. So that taught respect, and furthermore, if you rode a streetcar or a train, somebody came in 2 inches taller than us, we offered our seat automatically. And I just like to say that I think I mentioned to Axel, I think I'm thankful for the training I had in the Hitler Youth because it helped me become a better soldier in this country.
My name is Paul Wittig, and I was born in 1929 and in May. And this was right before Hitler came to power, actually. My earliest recollection about the war, about the Hitler time, was the burning of the books. Right in front of our house was a big place where the brown shirts had their marches and their rallies and also their music. That's the oldest, as a first experience what I had in my childhood when I was 4. I joined both the Jungvolk and the Hitler Youth because I was born in 29. The 1939, the year was when I joined the Jungvolk. And the Jungvolk, you go in and you had to make a, because you became a pimp, and then you have to make a test actually. And the test is mostly only athletic stuff. There's no mental or you have to run, you have to jump, and you throw a ball. It's like a baseball, Schlagball we called it. And when you did that in certain times, there was time limits, and as for 100 meter, you have to run it in a certain time. Then you became actually a full-fledged Jungvolk, and you was entitled to wear one of these Fahrten knives. You know. That's what's laying here on the table. Yeah, the dagger. Then the 4 years, like I said, the war started right after I joined in September. The war started, and we had to make toys for the kids, for the children. And we had evenings where we had we made little cars and little wood and boats for the kids for Christmas. Then toys and everything was short, and everybody had to pitch in. I was actually I was actually one of the lucky ones. Oh, I have to tell you where my city is in Landsberg an der Warthe. Is straight 80 miles east of Berlin. It's just across the new border from Germany and Poland. My hometown is now in Poland, and it's 60,000 people was there. And at home I had no my parents went along with they was not anti-Nazi or anything, but they went along because they got work now, and like many other people, and I liked it in the Jungvolk and in as much as everybody else, because it was a day where you have to go, and everybody else was there. Even so, when I joined, it was mandatory. You had to join. You didn't have a choice.
Okay.
Like,
Well, I've been asked, was the experience fun when you was in the Hitler Youth? Of course it was. When you're 10 years old and you go in an organization where fighting is going on, and I mean 10 years old, I've got an original leaflet here, and it says there the 10-year-olds belong to us. In 1943, by that time, we had a lot to do with fighter bomber attacks. And me being in the flak, in the anti-aircraft, it was fun as long as nobody shoots at you. You know, you get the hang of it. You see an aircraft coming in the distance, you got to know what that aircraft is. Now that helped us because we learned that in school. You know whether it was a P-38 or P-47, or whether it was a German Messerschmitt. And if it was a P-38, you better go and find that next ditch, because they come with 8 cannons firing at you, you know. And so the experience was actually, as a boy, good, as long as nobody shoots at you. You know, and when they shoot at you, you have to try to stay out of harm's way and dodge bullets, you know, which you can do actually very good, because there was plenty of room between the bullets at the time. My activities did not go to the extent that I had to go to parades and run with flags, but I had to attend a Sommerlager, which was sort of a camp near Kleve in northwest Germany. And we did campfires and put tents up, and we stood guard, and then we watched from 20 miles distance when the American bombers attacked Essen. You know, and the whole place went up in flames. That was our experience. And after 2 weeks sitting in the camp, we were all released. We had to go home again. and it went back to the school or to the flak. The school in 1944 eventually was abandoned because the invasion front came nearer to us. We lived 10 miles from the Dutch border. So we only had an air raid shelter for 300 children, and we had 570 children in the school. So you can imagine we were like herrings in the tin, in the can there. You know, we had to stay home, no more school until the war is won. What this time of, in 1944, the war is won. Yeah, we're surely going to win that. Well, we didn't. As I say, my war activities was mainly with the anti-aircraft, telephone messages, and sometimes I had to do the cooking as well, sauerkraut soup. That was all I could make. You try it, you got to live on that for 2 weeks, you know what you got. I've got a few photographs, what I rescued from the time. Anybody wants to see them later on, he's welcome to see them. And I've got it from the BDM leaflets and things like that. But it was a very good experience for a boy at my age, By 1944, when we were daily under attack, because we did not believe we were going to win this war. But then one day, Messerschmitt jets turned up. Oh yeah, this time we're going to win it. Then we heard of the V1, then we heard of the V2. And every day it was elation. Yeah, we're going to win that, we're going to win that. But now, by the 1st of March, it was all over for me.
I was only a year and a half in PIMF, and then I was moved up into Jungvolk. But at that time, my PIMF leader became also my Jungvolk leader, and he was a dentist. And I remember to today, when I had to have one tooth pulled, I went to him. And when he pulled the teeth, I said, "Ow." And he took his hand and hit me in the neck. And he said, "A German boy does not complain." But for having said that, next week on a Sunday morning training in the sports arena, it was actually a soccer field, but there were mud puddles. But we had to march. But then with the word Gefahr, you had to fall down. And he marched us 3 times to the mud puddle. We came with nice clean black pants, brown shirt, and we looked very, very bad with the mud. And then we stood before him, and we were criticized for coming in that shape to his indoctrination meeting. So I think in that year, the first years, young years, were really used to obey and to listen to leadership. Because the moment you came into the Jungvolk, then came the indoctrination. But I think you just on any command, and that one morning I remember too, he walked me through the mud puddle again too, with 3 other friends. And when he walked the first time, I just stood up and laughed at him. Because even as a boy, I think it became psychological. And for some reason, I never had to march so and fall in the mud puddle. And that's where I learned to really obey, but wait your time and then just find out. During that time too, we had to do various things. We lived now on the North Sea, so you hear reports from other areas. One thing we had to do, we had to deliver each week 30 pounds of tank. Tank was a wheat that grows on the rocks on the North Sea and had a high content of iodine. Yeah. So it was used for medical purposes. And the doctor just, with the dentist before, told me too, when I looked at him after the tooth pulling, he said, "Some people suffer more than you do." And then we had also to pick Camille. Camille was a weed growing on the seed lands, and we had to deliver 2 of us together, always 10 pounds a week, and that is a lot of blossoms. There's a lot of Camille. We had to dry them and send them in because medical supply was getting, at that time, very, very slow. But at that time, what started for us on the North Sea is The first bombing raids by the British, they were mainly night raids. On our town was a big seaport, Navy destroyers and minesweepers, and like I said, the gate to Hamburg, and there came the first flights by the British at night, probably 200 planes in the first raids. But then just shortly later, end of 43, begin 44, came the raids with the USA's Air Force. And I hear that today. We heard them over the North Sea when they were coming on the raids on Hamburg, July 26, 27th, 1943. At that air raid, there came 2,300 planes. The explosives on Hamburg at that night, we lived 40 miles away. The sky was yellow and there were ashes about 3-4 inches high in the countryside. But the main thing was the psychological. We could hear him outside in the North Sea as an island called Helgoland. Was a private island, was now used, but otherwise the flight from the southeast English coast to our area came over the North Sea because there were minimum defenses. Still today, like 2 years ago, we had a large forest fire in our area. And I went to one of our farms. And I closed my eyes because there was a smell from burns from the forest fire. And then I heard 2 planes from the DNR with water bombers. And then one, I think, was a Halifax or a Mitchell. Old English planes that were used, bought in Canada and were brought in. And I cried. Because they were the same, the way it was there.
Hans-Peter, do you want to also tell them about your training on the Panzerfaust?
Yeah, that came in 44. I was then taken into the Hitler Youth in in spring, if I'm right, in 44, and we had training with the Panzerfaust behind the dike. This was really paramilitary training. But classmates above me, when the war ended, I was 15 years old. So basically, I talk to you here today, I'm 77 years old, about a time period of 7 years, 8 years. And with the Panzerfaust, it came in various designs. There was a Panzerfaust 30, where you hit the targets with about 30 meter, 60, and then 90. The Panzerfaust 30 actually was a suicide weapon, because the vehicle still came to you, the tank or what it was. I never seen action, but we had basic training behind the dike, and I was at that time a small boy, so I couldn't handle this Panzerfaust, so they used me then for a taller boy who laid that in his arm, a taller boy, and grabbed around his lower torso to give him a more firmer stand. That's what it, and with safety, you had, I think, more people got hurt and killed during that time with the backfiring from the Panzerfaust, because it just came out, and you had to not only learn shooting, you had to look back to who was in that vicinity. And I seen for the first time here a Panzerfaust again, and I like to say that when Doug Becky, curator of the Military Museum at Fort Ripley, he interviewed me a year ago for a longer time for the greatest generation, and I thought I don't belong there. But and I like to say it here, but we came to the United States in October 58.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah. And so I think I should put that in later. But with the Panzerfaust was a very dramatic experience, and then to just see it again. And the early type really was a little bit different than this. They had here a lever, and here on the lower part just a little cutter pin. you popped it up, and then you just. But I think the recoil, you really had to hold that thing because it was just propelled for 30 meters. That was a big charge. Then you throw it away, and that's just a pile of it. Couldn't use it again. You could not in the field reload it again. So I still think today about it when I just even see it in the museum.
My experience are definitely separate from my colleagues here on the table because I don't want to use the word institutionalized, but I lived in a dorm with over 360 boys, and after we were taken over from the scout battalion into the Hitler Youth, all we did is just change uniforms. We had the scout battalion uniforms with the big hats, and after the Hitler Youth came and told the school either to close or take over, that they take over the Boy Scouts, and that's what happened. So we just continued on with the activities, and they were pretty rough. As Boy Scouts, we had 3 different schools within 20 kilometers of our school. And we conducted night raids, and we conducted day attacks. And I remember that one time we were allowed to use our bicycles, and Yogi Push and some of his guys there, we tried to reconnaissance, more or less force our way in, and we were trapped and took off with our bicycles, and the guy came out of the ditch and put the branch, a stick in the spikes of my bicycle, and I got like a rabbit head over heels over the handlebars and hurt my left arm, and later on it developed into poisoning because the blood has mixed with the dye from the shirt. So I got some experience here, what I experienced in 1940, because once I was done with school, I got directly into the service, and in a certain way I enjoyed the service, but there were problems. But outside of that, we followed the Hitler Youth activities, called it Hitler Youth activities, but we all knew that the Boy Scouts were always more interesting than were the Hitler Youth.
Yeah, I just want to mention that prior to that time and at the beginning, I experienced 3 moves of the family from one town to another. And we wound up in Magdeburg, in the center part of Germany, when I joined the Jungvolk. And there came a time when my parents separated. My mother went back to Hamburg, and we had a substitute mother, like a housekeeper, you might say, who took care of us kids. And by that time the war started, and my father was drafted in the home defense initially, and later on was drafted into the Navy. So it was the housekeeper and us kids. And that was about the time when I transitioned in the Hitler Youth. And at age 14. And that's when I did get a uniform. It was a swastika armband, and with this side arm knife on which it said blood and honor on the blade. And I was with a unit in the Hitler Youth that was the first aid unit. And our function was, it was sort of a special distinction to have a first aid kit on your, to have this first aid kit on both sides of you during parades, when we had to make sure that nobody fainted, and if somebody did faint during a parade, we knew what to do. So I went. I got 2 promotions in rank. I was a 2-striper, never made a star, but I got the silver achievement medal, which was similar to a Boy Scout merit badge after where you become Life or Star Scout or something like that, and everything was going hunky dory until the day came when I asked the principal of my school a question about my tuition statement, because it should have been less money than what I was being billed for, because I had a sister, and I should have gotten a lesser rate, the lesser rate, and this was outside of the principal's door during intermission time, when other students were going through the hallways, going out into the yard for break. And the principal said to me, "Don't you know that you are half Jewish?" I did not know. And my parents never told me. And word spread around the whole yard, and by that time I was kind of a marked person in the school. But that eventually blew over the years, because I tried to, and I actually was kicked out of the Hitler Youth, but I was still able to go to school. The 4 Jewish boys that were in my class had by then already disappeared, but I was still there. I also want to tell you, shortly after I was told that my mother was Jewish, you know, even though she had converted to Christianity before she married my father, but that didn't matter in those days. The Nazis strictly went by bloodlines, and so I said to my father, I was so desperate. I said, "Why did you have to marry a Jewish woman?" And he said to me, "Son, she was a beautiful woman, and we were in love, and the Jewish people have a lot of culture, and they're the chosen people of God." That was my father's answer. I don't know if I ever told you that, Bob. That's my son over there. Yeah. So after I got kicked, I was already out of the Hitler Youth, but I was still in school when my teacher came to me, gave me the 2-minute warning that trouble was going to start again. And that's when the principal walked into the class and he said, "The class is being moved to the anti-aircraft stations. The teachers will go with you. School will continue there, but you will be manning the aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, the flak." And the last thing he said, "Everybody goes except Adderholt." So I was given a choice to go back into the lower grade or to just take my diploma and leave. So that's the way that went.
Thank you for
I became an apprentice. I had a hard time getting placed into a job because I was told by the Works Administration or the Department of Labor that I could only do work that was customarily done by Jews, and I was able to land a trainee's job in a wholesale textile house. One ridiculous thing that happened, I got an order to show up for pre-military training and to wear the uniform. So I inquired, excuse me, I inquired about that. I said, you know, do you really want me to wear a uniform? Yes, you do. So I showed up in my Hitler Youth uniform, went through all that paramilitary training, like how to take a carbine gun apart and put it back together and to clean it. And I think there was also a segment about marksmanship. And after that was over, well, we did several other things, because after I got done with that training and went back to my job, I received another Silver Achievement Medal in the mail. So sometimes these people didn't really know what they were doing. And that happened to me also later on, when eventually I was taken out of my job and ordered to appear on a certain day at the Magdeburg train station, just like the Jews did at other times, to move to concentration camps. We were put on into cattle cars, and we didn't know where we were going. And we were, as I learned later, we became forced labor camp inmates in France. And we had to cut a piece out of the side of a mountain where a catapult was supposed to be installed to launch airplanes that were being repaired inside of the mountain. And there was another group in camp. They were all Ukrainian women, and they were supposed to build a road up to the entrance of the repair shop,
Okay.
where the damaged planes could come in.
In order to prepare us for mentally and physically for warfare, we had what we called Geländespiele, where our company from our town, we were about 250 Jungvolk, aged 10 to 12 or 14. In the neighbor town, we were about 200. We fought, they turned us loose in the nearby woods, and we had to kill as many enemies as we could. They wore red armbands, and we had blue ones. And obviously, the idea of it was to get as many, the opposite armbands, and as soon as you lose your armband, you're dead. So at night, obviously, when we got back after 2 or 3 hours, we counted the armbands, and then we declared who was the winning town, either they or we. And obviously, it got quite rough at times, so we had to carry a lot of the boys home on stretchers. I remember one guy, he was one of our leaders, and he was hollering all the way home, "I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead." And he's still alive today. But also, as you mentioned, in nearby town, Stuttgart Airport, we had to go periodically to go on the tarmac and the landing strip to pick up shrapnels from the anti-aircraft guns, the 88s that all the Allied airmen feared, because they would puncture the tires of the German Messerschmitt 109s or the Focke-Wulf 190s. So at least once a week, we had to go down to the airport and cover the whole airfield and remove the shrapnel. And also, obviously, the airport was bombed, the runway was bombed periodically, almost on a weekly basis. They had lots of Russian prisoner of wars repair the airfield as quickly as they could. In the meantime, the German airplanes would land on the nearby Autobahn that bypassed the airport as well as our town. So the aircraft would land and start on the Autobahn, and we as kids had to push them into the woods for cover so they'd be hidden from the air. And, because during that period of time, I'm talking about the time of 1944, early 45, all the able-bodied men between 16 and 55 were fighting the war somewhere. So we were the next group of people, the men, we were the men that had to do whatever was necessary. And we also had to, it was never mentioned here tonight, that the Allies also dropped potato bugs in our potato fields, so we had to go out periodically and pick potato bugs. Germany never had potato bugs prior to World War II. So that was some of the fun we had. And obviously we as kids, we were told Hitler was our leader, but, you know, who cared? You know, we were having fun. In spite of the trouble, and also in 44, both of our schools were bombed. So we as kids obviously were elated. No more school. But then we had to clean up the rubble, scrape all the mortar off the bricks so they could be reused again. And after about a week, we thought it was not a good idea. We'd rather have our schools back.
When I joined the Hitler Youth, I went into the Navy, Hitler Youth, and I had actually really fun. I liked sailing and rowing and things like this. It was only now in the evenings that we had it, because some of the fellows was already working. You could already start working with 14 in Germany at that time in the profession. When the war came closer to us, we had to go out. We was drafted into the digging ditches on the eastern side to defend against the Russian. And to my surprise, there was already the same thing like on the Siegfried line was already halfly built on the eastern side on the Polish border. And but the Panzer ditches wasn't, you know, these things from cement, but supposed to keep the tanks away. They was already in place, but we had to dig the ditches where the tanks supposed to fall in, and then also the trenches for the soldiers. But no soldiers or no tank ever went in there, because at that time, when Hitler took all the soldiers away from the Eastern Front to fight the Ardennen offensive, we had hardly any soldiers there. And then when the war ended, the Russians just marched from Warsaw all the way to the Oder. And our city was here just in front of the Oder.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.